Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for our first daily dose of Dominaria United spoilers. So we just kicked off spoiler season today. A couple hours ago, we got a first look at this set with a preview stream from Wizards, and it is more exciting than I could have imagined. We got one of the best reprints, most exciting reprints in Standard in a long time. We got so many returning characters. This set looks absolutely amazing, and we have like a million cards to talk about, which means we should probably jump right into it. Start talking sweet new Dominaria United cards. But before we do, two quick reminders. Number one, if you want to keep up on all the latest spoilers throughout the day, you should head on over to MTGpreviews.com. And number two, if you need some Dominaria United cards, you can snag them from our amazing sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. And if you get a free goldfish sticker, just let them know you want one in your order notes and they'll hook you up. Anyway, let's talk for the first time about Dominaria United. So first up today, we got a reprint, and it's pretty rare that we kick off spoiler season with a reprint being our very first card. But in this case, I think it's justified because the best Black Planeswalker, or maybe best Black Planeswalker in the history of Magic, is coming back to Standard for the first time in more than a decade. Liliana of the Veil returns in Dominaria United, and I probably don't even really need to read the text on Liliana. You probably know what it does. It's a modern staple. 3 mana, 3 loyalty, +1, everyone discards a card. -2, target player sacks the creature. -6, you kind of factor fiction away your opponent's permanents. You sort them into 2 piles. I gotta sack one, and they keep the other. So Liliana of the Veil is a huge reprint for multiple reasons. Number one is it's a really expensive card. If you look at existing printings of Liliana, they're around $70. If you scrounge around on Facebook Market, maybe you can find like a $60 copy or something. But either way, this is the most expensive Standard reprint we've had in quite a while. So financially, it's a big deal. Hopefully this gets the cost down a little bit if you want to play Liliana in Modern or now in Pioneer or in Standard. It's got new art, which is sweet. Not quite as iconic as old art maybe, but it still looks pretty good. So this is a card that it's mostly known for being a Modern Jund staple, and this will hopefully help get the price down a little bit. If you do want to put together like Boomer Jund in Modern, shows up in some other Modern decks as well. But maybe the most exciting part about this is putting Liliana into newer formats for the first time. We've never had Liliana the Veil in Pioneer, in Explorer, in Historic. So if you think about those formats, like in Pioneer, Rakdos Midrange is one of the best decks in the format. Same with Explorer. Like this is a legit top tier, maybe best deck in the format, and it is ready built to support Liliana. This is going to add a whole new dimension to one of the best decks in the format already. So there's going to be multiple homes for Liliana, I think, in Pioneer, and this is probably going to be where the new version of Liliana makes the biggest impact. Even outside of Rakdos, it seems great for Greasefang decks. At Greasefang, you want the removal aspect. You can discard your Parhelions to get them in the graveyard for Greasefang. It seems great in Mono Black aggro. Like they have a bunch of stuff they don't mind discarding because it comes back from the graveyard. So I think we're going to see Liliana really shake up Explorer/Pioneer and be very, very good there. As far as Standard is concerned, I'm a little worried about how good this might be in the Esper shelves. Out of all the tier decks in Standard, going through rotation, Esper is probably the one that loses the least. So you still got Kaido, you still got Wandering Emperor, you still got Tenacious Underdog, which works really well with Liliana because you can discard it and then blitz it. So I think this slots into Esper control. Maybe being double black is a bit of a drawback, but it seems really good there. It also seems good with some new cards we're getting in Standard that we'll talk more about later, like Squee, Dubious Monarch. Doesn't mind being in the graveyard because it has pseudo escape. Exquiape? I don't know, that one didn't really work. Works well with the Raven Man, wants you to be discarding stuff. So I think that Liliana the Veil, this is a Planeswalker that's really strong. I don't think this is a breaking Standard strong Planeswalker. It's not an Oko, it's not Jace the Mind Sculptor a decade ago, but Liliana is a really good value card. It just is so many little things really, really well. Pressures your opponent with the ultimate, pressures their hand, so it's good against control, pressures the battlefield by sacking creatures, so it's good against aggro, good against creature decks. So I think we're going to see a lot of Liliana in Standard, and I think this is going to develop into a huge card in Pioneer as well. Plus, hopefully, this reprinting will get the price down a little bit for Modern players who want to put together Boomer Jund or whatever. Speaking of Planeswalkers, they're not all reprints. We also got a new one in Ajani Sleeper Agent, our completed version of Ajani. So much like Tamiyo from a couple sets ago, Ajani's got the weird completed mana symbol, so it's 4 mana in the Selesnya colors, but one of of that mana is the weird Phyrexian mana, whatever we want to call it. So essentially, you can cast Ajani for 4 mana, and it comes into play with 4 loyalty. Or if you want to, you can cast it for 3 mana into life, and it comes into play with 2 less loyalty, so 2 loyalty. And then as far as abilities, +1, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature or planeswalker, put it in your hand. Otherwise, you may put it on the bottom of your library. So some card advantage, going to be at its best in a creature or planeswalker heavy deck, obviously. You're going to be maybe 50-50 to draw a card when you consider that your deck's probably gotta have some spells. You got your Ajanis at least. You gotta have 24 lands or whatever. You're probably gonna be about 50-50 to draw a card. And if you whiff, well, at least you get a little bit of card selection. If it's a bad card, you can put it to the bottom or whatever. -3, distribute 3 +1/+1 counters. They gain vigilance until end of turn. And then -6, you get an emblem with whenever you cast a creature or planeswalker spell, target opponent gets 2 poison counters. A really kind of weird looking ability, although it works really well with the Phyrexian aspect of Ajani, with Ajani turning into this Phyrexian nightmare that's poisoning people out of the game. So I think that Ajani Sleep Raging, if you look at these abilities, it's pretty interesting. Its +1 is almost exactly Kabretti Ascendancy, like almost literally word for word Kabretti Ascendancy. Kabretti Ascendancy is an enchantment, it just sits out and does its thing. Ajani, you gotta plus it and it can't die to damage or attacks or whatever, but a pretty good source of card advantage. The -3, a little bit weird with Ajani. If you play it for its completed cost, you're not gonna have enough loyalty to use it right away. If you play it for 4 mana, you can use it right away, and its effect is really kind of a 4 mana card. Defend the Celestus, which isn't instant, but still 3 counters, distributed as you want, and some vigilance for a bonus. Not a bad effect. And then the -6, the best comparison, I think, is actually the ultimate on Chandra Torture Defiance, where Chandra, you ultimate it, and then whenever you cast a spell, you deal 5 damage to whatever you want. Well, Ajani's kind of the same way. It's more limited. You gotta cast creatures or planeswalkers, and you can't hit your opponent's creatures, but if you can ultimate Ajani and cast 5 creature or planeswalker spells, you just poison your opponent out of the game. And if you cast it for its full cost, it only takes 2 upticks to get to the ultimate, and then you have a pretty interesting and really hard to deal with clock, because it's an emblem, so your opponent just can't get rid of it. So I think that Ajani, it's going to be interesting to see where this card fits. I think there's really 2 criteria you're looking for as far as building an Ajani deck. First, you got to be creature heavy or planeswalker heavy, but you really got to care about those card types. You got to be like a collected company style deck. You want to have like 30 creatures or planeswalkers, so that +1 is hitting about half the time. And then bonus points if you're a +1/+1 counter deck. But we have decks like this in standard. We have decks that care about +1/+1 counters, Hopeful Initiate, Modify. We got Halana and Elena still around. So those decks, not only do they care about +1/+1 counters, they also happen to have a lot of creatures. So I could see Ajani fitting into some sort of like Naya mid-range Modify deck, maybe some sort of Selesnya human deck. Humans have a lot of counter synergies going on with Hopeful Initiate. And then Ajani seems like a really sweet option there. If you're against control, worried about counters, you can sneak it into play for 3 mana, maybe get through the counters. If you're not worried about that, you can wait a turn, get some more loyalty on it. Also could be an interesting option in some sort of like Super Friends completed style deck. We got Tamiyo, we got Elspeth, we got Ajani, we got Wandering Emperor. There's a bunch of planeswalkers in these colors, and we got Broker's Ascendancy to kind of tie it all together. And that's the other way you can really build around that +1. If you got a ton of planeswalkers, you're still going to be drawing cards. You might be even drawing better cards because you're going to be drawing a lot of planeswalkers. So I'm curious to try some sort of Ajani Super Friends deck with the pieces we have in standard after rotation as well. Once you get back to older formats, I don't think Ajani is going to be an all-star there, but I could see trying like some sort of +1/+1 counter deck in maybe Historic or Explore with Winding Constrictor and Conclave Mentor. So Ajani Sleeper Agent, I like this card. I don't think this is a busted planeswalker by any stretch. It's not like super duper broken, you know, Oko or something. But I do think in the right shell, Ajani offers a lot. It offers some creature pumping, it offers card advantage, an ultimate that is going to win the game eventually, even if it's not very quick. So in the right deck, I think this could be a really nice addition. Although I don't think it's a card you can just slam in any deck and get value out of it. Unlike something like Liliana the Veil, which if you're playing black, you can just kind of jam that and it's going to be good. Ajani, you need a pretty specific support package. Next up, we got a new twist on one of the best additions to Magic in the modern era, which is Sagas, is shown off by the World Spell. So the World Spell, it's a saga. It looks like every other saga. 7 mana, 3 abilities, you get your lure counters, but there's a twist here. It has read ahead, and read ahead means you get to choose what lore counter you start at. So let's read World Spell. Lore counters 1 and 2 are look at the top 7 cards of your library. You can reveal a non-saga permanent from among them and put them in your hand. The rest go on the bottom in a random order. And then the last lore counter is put up to 2 non-saga permanent cards from your hand on the battlefield. So how this is going to work in practice, thanks to Read Ahead, is let's say you're empty-handed and you play the World Spell. You're definitely going to want to start at Chapter 1, Chapter 2 to dig through your deck to try to find some big things to put into play, and then you hit the 3rd lore counter and put them into play. On the other hand, let's say you already got your finisher in hand, or 2 finishers in hand. Even better, you can play the World Spell and just skip over those first 2 chapters and have the very first one, the one that triggers when it comes into play, be the 3rd chapter, so you just get to immediately put these 2 huge permanents into play. And I love this mechanic. Sagas are already one of the best things Wizards has done in a long time, and this is a really cool new twist that adds a new way to play with these cards that we just haven't seen before. So I really love Read Ahead. As far as the World Spell itself, I think it's calling back to Tooth and Nail, and it reminds me a bit of Tooth and Nail, where Tooth and Nail, you can search for 2 creatures for 7 mana, put them in your hand, or put 2 creatures from your hand into play, or if you pay 9 mana, things to entwine, you can do both. The World Spell's kind of like that, with the twist that you can hit any non-saga permanents, but the drawback that it's gonna be a little bit slow. Tooth and Nail is often like 9 mana, tutor out 2 things that win the game right away. The World Spell can kind of do the same thing, but it's gonna do it over the course of a few turns, unless you just happen to have your finishers in hand. Also a little bit like Storm the Festival, a little bit like See the Unwritten, these expensive green spells that can potentially put 2 really huge things on the battlefield. Whether or not the World Spell is actually going to be good, I don't know. The upside is huge. Like, this could be 7 mana, put an Omniscience and Emrakul into play. 7 mana, put an Ulamog and Emrakul into play. Whatever, 2 massive things that literally just win you the game. On the other hand, I feel like there's going to be times when you don't have your finisher in hand and you play this. In those cases, those first 2 lore counters don't really do much. So the suspend 2 aspect is going to be a problem because you're paying 7 mana and all you're really doing is drawing a card. And then the next turn for your 7 mana, you're still just kind of drawing a card. So the slowness is a concern. So I think the ceiling on this card is incredibly high, like win the game on the spot high. On the other hand, the drawback is, the floor is, you play this for 7 mana and you die before you ever get to the most impactful lore counters if you don't already have your finishers in hand. So mechanic really good. Just how strong the World Spell is, probably gonna have to wait and see. Speaking of the new Read Ahead mechanic, we also get a blue version, just a rare but still pretty sweet. The Phasing of Zhalfir, a 4 mana Read Ahead saga. First 2 lore counters, another target non-land permanent phases out, and it can't phase in for as long as you control the Phasing of Zhalfir. And then the last mode, destroy all creatures. For each creature destroyed this way, its controller makes a 2/2 black Phyrexian creature token. So Mark Rosewater, in his little teaser, spoiled a blue Wrath, essentially, and I'm pretty sure this is it. The Wrath aspect of this card, the drawback is you are giving your opponent creatures, which is kind of a bummer, although I do like how this card works with itself. If you have the time, you can play this and phase out a couple of your things so they don't get destroyed, and then the Wrath mode goes off, and you get your stuff back, along with maybe some Phyrexians. So it is a really neat card. It reminds me a little bit of Phyrexian Scriptures, the Saga Wrath thing, although of course with Read Ahead, you can just jump right to the Destroy All Creatures mode if you want to. Also very reminiscent of Curse of Swine. Curse of Swine, you exile X target creatures, and then each creature exiled this way ends up being a 2/2 boar. This kind of works the same way, although there's some big upsides here. The downside of Phasing of Zhalfir compared to Curse of Swine is you don't get to exile, which in some cases matters. If you're playing Commander and your opponent has an indestructible creature, Ulamog or something, being able to exile it is a big deal. Plus, exiling means your opponent can't get it back from the graveyard. On the other hand, the Phasing of Zhalfir gets rid of everything, turning it into 2/2 Phyrexians, but still it blows up the entire board for 4 mana. The Curse of Swine on a big board full of creatures is going to cost a lot of mana to deal with the entire board. So I will say, I think the Phasing of Zhalfir is very close to unplayable in 60 card formats. If you think about Wraths, you usually want them against creature decks, especially against aggro decks. If you're playing control or maybe mid-range, the problem is you're not really sweeping the board. When you resolve the Phasing of Zhalfir, you're just turning everything into 2/2s, which how good that is really depends on the board state. Against an aggro deck, you could actually be doing nothing. If you blow up a bunch of Ascendant Pack leaders, your opponent getting 2/2s, probably actually an upgrade. Even if you blow up a Jeweled Thief or an Uven Moldada commodity, the Phasing of Zhalfir might not save you. It's not a Wrath of God, it's not a Supreme Verdict where your control deck casts this, the board is clear, you're safe, you don't gotta worry about anything. You're still gonna have to deal with the 2/2s coming at you the next turn. So my guess is, in 60 card formats, this is either fringe or unplayed, although I do think it's kind of cute with some counter manipulation like Hex Parasite or Power Conduit. With these cards that can remove lore counters, you can just keep phasing out a creature every turn and keeping them phased out for as long as the Phasing of Zhalfir stays around. So that's probably more like in a janky against the odds thing, but it does seem sweet. You can kind of just like lock creatures out of the game if you can keep removing these counters and keep everything phased out. Where I think this shines is in Commander. If you look at Commander, the Curse of Swine is a staple. It's like the best blue Wrath, discounting, I guess, Cyclonic Rift, depending on how you feel about bouncing everything. But Curse of Swine actually sees a ton of play in the format, and I'm pretty sure that the Phasing of Zhalfir is just a strict upgrade. So if you are playing a mono blue deck, and you're struggling to find Wraths to deal with the board, I think this is a card that you're more than fine with playing. You're downgrading your opponent's stuff into 2/2s, you're buying yourself a lot of time. If you're in a multicolor deck, then you can probably splash a Wrath from the other color, but in mono blue in specific, I wouldn't be surprised to find that the Phasing of Zhalfir is a new staple in Commander. We also got a pretty sweet new mythic. We got so many mythics today. Soul of Windgrace. 4 mana, 5/4 legendary cat avatar. When it enters a battlefield or attacks, you can put a land card from a graveyard, not even your graveyard, any graveyard, on the battlefield tapped under your control. And then it's got 3 abilities. Pay a green, discard a land, gain 3 life. Pay 1 in a red, discard a land, draw a card. Pay 2 in a black, discard a card. It gains indestructible and tap it. So Soul of Windgrace, to me this just reads like a pretty powerful effect. It's calling back to Lord Windgrace, of course. Planeswalker, legal is your commander, land matters thing that's getting lands in and out of the graveyard. So it's a cool reference to Lord Windgrace. It plays kind of similarly in creature form. And I think this could be a pretty decent card in Standard. If you look at this all around, its stats are good. I mean, a 5/4 for 4, that's fine. And then it's got a bunch of sweet abilities. And in Standard, there's plenty of ways to get lands in the graveyard. We got channel lands like Beseju that you can just discard to put in the graveyard. You can cycle away your Triomes. You can crack an Evolving Wilds or Riveteer's Outlook. And remember, this cares about any graveyard. So if your opponent does any of these things, or they're playing a self-mill deck or something, you can just steal your opponent's lands, which seems really, really powerful. Plus, remember, if you got like Evolving Wilds or Riveteer's Outlook, you can be doing this every single turn. Like, that's a ramp combo. You Evolving Wilds, crack it, get a land, Soul Windgrace gets it back, you crack the Evolving Wilds, get a land, attack with Windgrace, get it back. Every turn you're just adding to your mana base. It also works well with things that can get lands in your hand, because the more lands you have in hand, the more times you can activate its ability. Like, one of the most powerful aspects of Soul of Windgrace is that 3 mana to discard a land to protect it by making it indestructible. If you have extra lands in hand, it's going to be really easy to keep this on the battlefield. So stuff like Wrenn and 7, you can tick it up, get a bunch of lands in hand, or Sloggerk the Overslime, if you can make the mana work, can get a bunch of lands in hand. So I think that's another direction you can go. We still have Splendid Reclamation in Standard, which likes lands in the graveyard, so maybe there's some weird graveyard mill ramp deck that you could put together. So Soul of Windgrace, I like this card. If you're playing Windgrace in Commander, I think this slots right in. It might even be more powerful than Lord Windgrace in Commander. So maybe this just heads your Commander deck, or any land matter themes if you're playing some sort of Jund Landfall deck or whatever. This is going to be great getting you extra land drops, getting things in and out of the graveyard. And in Standard, it's just got a really nice combination of abilities and stats that I think is going to make it pretty playable. Next up, we got the return of one of my favorite Magic cards. Zur is back in Zur Eternal Schemer. And I gotta say, as someone who's been playing Magic a long time, I love how many callbacks there are to old creatures, old characters in this Dominaria set. There's so much nostalgia. It's just oozing with nostalgia. So Zur Eternal Schemer, 3 mana, 1/4. It's in the Esper colors. It's a legendary human wizard with flying, and it says enchantment creatures you control have Death Touch, Lifelink, and Hexproof. Pretty nice combination of abilities. And then you can pay 1 and a white to turn non-aura enchantment you control into a creature in addition to its other types, and it has base power and toughness equal to its mana value, which is pretty scary. We see this mechanic a lot with artifacts, things that like animate an artifact, turn it into a threat, like in Soul Artifact, but we don't see this nearly nearly as much with enchantments, especially just for 2 mana. This can turn a big enchantment into a really big attacker, and then because it's an enchantment creature, once you turn it into a creature, whatever you animate is going to have Death Touch, Lifelink, and Hexproof for as long as Jhoira's around. So Jhoira is just a really sweet card. Also, shout out to the stained glass art. The showcase treatment of the set looks spectacular. So in Standard, we do have some enchantment creatures, just natural enchantment creatures that we got from Kamigawa. Like all those sagas flip into enchantment creatures like the Kami War. Shigeki, all the shrines happen to be enchantment creatures. So you can just build an enchantment creature deck with Jhoira if you want to. Also, we got Weaver of Harmony, which specifically cares about enchantment creatures. Not sure how you really make the mana work if you're trying to play Weaver into Jhoira Eternal Scheme. You're gonna need a lot of triomes going on. But we have multiple payoffs now for playing enchantment creatures, which is interesting. So maybe there's something there with this enchantment creature plan. And then the other way to go with Jhoira is just play other enchantments and turn them into creatures. Play your Hallowed Haunting that you want anyway, as you're casting a bunch of enchantments to make a bunch of spirits, and then you can use Jhoira to turn it into a 4/4 Death Touch, Lifelink, Hexproof threat, or Spirit Sister's Call, or Obscure Ascendancy. So that seems sweet as well. There's also some really weird shenanigans you can do with Jhoira, especially in Commander or in older formats. So one of the best things you can do is turn Jhoira into an enchantment creature, because then Jhoira's going to protect itself. So if you can play like Enchanted Evening, which is just all permanents or enchantments in addition to its other type, then Jhoira is going to be a 1/4 flying enchantment creature, so it'll have Death Touch, Lifelink, and Hexproof. So that's going to be super hard to actually kill your Jhoira, and then you can turn all your other stuff into enchantments and turn them into creatures and smash your opponent to death. If you want to go really deep, One with the Stars can do it. 4 mana enchantment that enchants a creature or enchantment, and it says enchanted permanent is an enchantment and loses all other card types. It still has abilities, but is no longer a creature. But what I think you can do here, and again, correct me if the comments if I'm wrong, you can play this on Jhoira to turn Jhoira into an enchantment, and then you can use Jhoira's ability to turn itself back into a creature, and if you activate that ability after One with Stars is on it, it should overwrite it, I think, and then Jhoira will be an enchantment creature again, and it'll have all the protections. So, I don't know, weird rules interaction, confirm it in the comments if you know, but I think that can also get the job done. So Jhoira, it's really sweet. It seems like an interesting standard threat, and in Commander, it seems like a really cool build around. If you want to play like Esper Enchantress, but you don't want to play Jhoira proper, OG Jhoira, I think this is a really sweet option. We also got the return of Solkanar in Solkanar the Tainted. 5 mana, Grixis 5/5 legendary elemental demon. And it says, at the beginning of your end step, choose one that hasn't been chosen. Draw a card, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life, or it deals 3 damage to up to 1 target creature or planeswalker, or exile Solkanar and then return it to the battlefield under an opponent's control. So Solkanar, obviously referencing an old legend card, Solkanar the Swamp King. So cool to see Solkanar back. As far as how this card actually plays, I think it's pretty bad. I think it's supposed to be a reference to Demonic Pact. It has a very similar formatting where you got to choose one of these options. Options are beneficial, and then there's a bad one. In the case of Demonic Pact, you literally lose the game. With Solkanar, it's not quite as bad, but you still got to give it to your opponent. The problem with Solkanar, I think, is twofold. One is its abilities just aren't that good. Like, draw a single card, drain for 2, lightning bolt a creature or planeswalker. Those aren't super powerful abilities, and then you're gonna have to give it to your opponent eventually. Anyway, with Demonic Pact at least, you have some pretty strong abilities. Drawing 2, discarding 2, 4 damage to a creature or player, and you get to gain 4 life. So I think Solkanar, I guess the upside is it is on a 5/5 body, which is nice, and if you really want to build around it, you can try to get around the drawback where you like choose the good modes and then blink it with Thassa, or choose the good modes and then sacrifice it to Woestrider. Although I will say, if you play this in Commander, that last mode, the exile mode, it does not work the way that you want it to. You would think that what you could do with Solkanar in Commander is play it, choose the good modes, and then when you have to choose the exile mode, exile it and be like, okay, I'm gonna put this back in my command zone, we'll start over from the beginning. But that doesn't actually work under the current Commander rules. The ability is not going to resolve and give you the option to put your Solkanar back in the command zone until after the entire ability is done. So there's no window to choose to put Solkanar into your command zone when you choose the exile mode. So keep that in mind if you build around it. You are going to have to give it to one of your opponents unless you do the Thassa shenanigans or Woestrider shenanigans, sacrifice it, blanket, something like that to reset it. So Solkanar, I don't think it's a good card, but it does seem like a fun build around in Commander in specific. In other formats, I'm just not sure that it really does enough, especially with the downside risk. It's not like its abilities are so strong it's likely to win you the game, but there's still the drawback that once you choose the modes, you're gonna have to give it to your opponent. So I don't think we're gonna be seeing this one too much in like standard, definitely not in formats like modern. But if you're looking for a fun leader for Demonic Pact Tribal or something in Commander, this could be the good option. We also got a look at our land cycle from Dominaria United, and the Painlands are returning. So this has been a land cycle that's been in the game for a very long time, going back to Ice Age, I think was the first printing of them. And I think there's good news and bad news here. So the lands themselves, they're really strong lands. They come into play untapped, add a colorless or a mana of any 2 colors, but you gotta take a damage if you want to get the colored mana out of it. So coming into play untapped, really, really good. It's also a very, very strange land cycle because the allied and enemy ones have been treated very differently. So the enemy versions of the Painlands have been reprinted a million times, like Shivan Reef, Caves of Koilos. There's a million of them. They're super, super cheap. They're in every format except for standard, and now they'll be in standard. On the other hand, the allied versions, Attic Waste, Sulphurous Springs, Carpoosan Forest, these ones have not been reprinted hardly at all, to the point where they're not even legal in Pioneer, and they're actually kind of expensive, at least somewhat expensive. So this isn't like a super high value land cycle, but the big upside is it's going to add the rest of these into formats like Pioneer, Historic, Explorer, where they were just missing. So I'm really happy that they finally completed this cycle. You're probably wondering, why is there only 6 of them? And my guess is we're going to get the rest of them in the Brothers War, and there's only 6 in this set and the other 4 in the next set, which is kind of what they did with like Pathways last year, where part of them were in one set, the rest were in the other set. So that kind of makes sense. So I think this is a fine option. It's not the fetch lands, some super high value set, but they are lands that are going to have a big impact on formats like Pioneer, and they're going to be good in Standard. And I love that somehow Sulphurous Springs managed to have a callback to the Devil in the Art from one of my favorite arts in all of Magic. The original, it's so good, with the devil just chilling in the springs, living its best life. So sweet to see a callback to that. So it seems like Wizards has just went out of their way to pour on the nostalgia in this set, and it's super awesome. We also got our next Praetor in Sheoldred the Apocalypse. So if you saw the leak going around, the rumored leak, definitely incorrect in this case. The real Sheoldred, 4 mana, 4/5, legendary Phyrexian Praetor with Death Touch, and it says whenever you draw a card, you gain 2 life. Whenever an opponent draws a card, they lose 2 life. So Sheoldred, I think this card's actually pretty good. It might not be quite as epic feeling as I was expecting for a creature named the Apocalypse, but if you just look at what this card does, it reminds me kind of like Kalitas. This is 4-drop with good stats that's gonna gain you life and stabilize the board. It reminds me of Obsidian Ghost Council in a weird way. Obsidian drains for 2 each turn as you exile it, put it back into play. Sheoldred, if you hit your opponent for 2 during their turn, gain 2 during your turn from drawing cards. You're gonna be gaining 2 a turn, stabilizing, slowly draining your opponent. Also a little bit like Kaweza, where you have these shenanigans for drawing cards. So I think that Sheoldred, it's just a good creature. I mean, a 4 mana, 4/5 Death Touch is good. Gaining life, having your opponent lose life, add all that together, and it feels pretty spiky to me. Like, this is a card that you can just jam in kind of any deck, and it's probably going to generate value. It's going to be at its best, I think, probably against aggro. Where against aggro, this comes down, and it's a huge wall. Like, Mono Red's going to have a hard time killing it, hard time getting through it, and then the incidental life gain and drain is really, really powerful. Same against, like, Mono White. And the nice thing about having Death Touch is if your opponent does have some big monster that would otherwise best Sheoldred in combat, it's still going to take it down because of Death Touch. And then if you want to go deep with Sheoldred, there are some combos. The most obvious one, Lich's Mastery. Lich's Mastery, with all of its text, says whenever you gain life, you draw that many cards. So if you get Sheoldred and Lich's Mastery out, you're going to gain life, which will draw you cards, which will gain you life, which will draw you cards. And the end result will be you will draw literally your entire deck and gain a ridiculous amount of life. And then you don't lose a game, because part of Lich's Mastery's text is you don't lose the game. So this is just going to happen until you go through your entire deck. If you had something like Veto Thorn of the Duskrose in, something that triggers based on you gaining life, then you just win the game on the spot. So I could see this being a fun build around in a format like Commander. So Sheoldred, I don't think there's a ton to say about this card, honestly. It's just good. It's got good stats, it's got fine abilities, good against aggro, combo potential in Commander. So maybe not epic in the way that like Vorinclex or Jin-Gitaxias was when they returned, but just a solid card. We also got our first look at a very old character that's never had a card before, the Raven Man. So the Raven Man, 2 mana, 1/2 legendary human wizard. It's a black card, and it says at the beginning of each end step, if a player discarded a card this turn, make a 1/1 black bird token with flying, and this creature can't block, and then pay 4, tap it. Each opponent discards a card, activate this only as a sorcery. So the Raven Man, is this card good? I'm not actually sure. It does seem to work really well with Liliana the Veil. That's the first thing I thought of. Raven Man on 2, Liliana on 3, take up Liliana, get the bird token. I really wish the birds could block. I think that's the biggest issue I have with this card. Maybe it's still just super powerful as it is, but I feel like if the birds could block, I'd be a lot higher on it. Then it could be like build your own Bitter Blossom. But because the birds can't block, it's going to be hard to use them for anything but attacking your opponent, honestly, or maybe sack fodder in some sort of sack deck, although we're losing the Deadly Disputes and some of those synergies in Standard. So we'll have to wait and see, but I think the can't block part is a really meaningful downside on this card that might keep it from seeing too much play. The other issue with Standard is we got some decent black 2-drops. Tenacious Underdog, very good. And then cards like Blade of Oni, Voldaren Bloodcaster might get another look now that we're heading through rotation and the format's getting a little smaller. Can the Raven Man beat out those cards? I'm not sure. It's just kind of slow. 4 mana to make each opponent discard. That's kind of cute in Commander because it hits everyone. But in a 1v1 format, pay 4, tap your thing to discard a single card. That's asking a lot. Even if you get a 1/1 bird, and if the bird could block, you could kind of justify it because you'd be like, okay, well, like, sure, they're going to attack me with some stuff, but I can use the bird to chump block and get them empty-handed. But since the bird can't block, that plan becomes a lot harder. Although Voldaren Bloodcaster does exemplify how you can try to build around the Raven Man's ability to make birds. If you can use blood tokens, that's a way you can discard cards at instant speed, and this does trigger each end step. So if you can discard during your turn and then discard during your opponent's turn, you're going to get a bird for each of them, 2 birds a turn. And as you go back into other formats, you get other options like cycling, for example, cycling during your turn and then during your opponent's turn and Commander the next opponent's turn. You can't be making a lot of birds, but are those birds good enough to matter? Maybe you got to find another way to take advantage of them other than them just being random attackers. The can't block thing just really gets to me. It does seem like a sweet upgrade to some Commander decks at a minimum, like Turgid God of Fright, Tiny Bones Trinket Theft. If you're playing a discard Matters deck, it seems like a really nice addition to the 99. If you want to play as your commander, I think there's some upside in that it's not as powerful. One thing I always preach about Commander is sometimes it's better to have a less powerful legend leading your deck. And it's true that Raven Man, it's not Turgid, nowhere near as strong. It's not Tiny Bones, nowhere near as strong. However, sometimes that's an upside. If you sit down to a Commander pod and reveal Turgid, your opponents are going to groan. You're going to be the arch enemy. They're going to try to kill you because they know what Turgid does. Tiny Bones might not be quite as bad, but still, that's a card that if you reveal it in the command zone, people don't want you discarding their hand. They want to be able to play their card, so they're probably going to come after you. The Raven Man, if they see that, they're probably going to think, oh, mono black cycling or something like that. They're not necessarily going to think their goal's just going to be to wipe their hand and steal all their permanents. So this might be a little bit friendlier and less arch enemy making Commander to play for your mono black discard deck. So the Raven Man, it's cool to see the card coming to Magic. How good it is, I'm leaning towards not very, but we'll have to wait and see. We also got a new Jhoira in Jhoira Ageless Innovator. Is it 2-drop, 2/3 Human Artificer? This says tap it, put 2 Ingenuity counters on it, and then you can put an artifact card with mana value X or less from your hand onto the battlefield, where X is the number of Ingenuity counters on Jhoira. So Jhoira, to me, this reads like a plant for the future. If you watch the announcement day stream today, we had a lot of artifact sets coming up. Wizards talked about the Brothers War being an artifact set. That's like the main theme of that set. And then we're going to Phyrexia, which was mirrored in before the Phyrexians turned over. So we're heading into like Artifact Central. Right now, there's not a ton to do with Jhoira in Standard. I was trying to look through the artifacts, and you can like play it, next turn tap it, put a Bank Buster into play, and then the next turn, if it lives, tap it and put a Surge Hacker mech into play, and then the next turn, maybe like a Mysterious Limousine. But there's just not a ton of artifacts right now in Standard. But in the future, that's going to change. We're going to have a ton of artifacts. So I could see Jhoira becoming a very powerful ramp spell. Like if this sticks out, it's kind of adding 2 mana each turn towards artifact spells in a really weird way. A little bit restricted in the way you have to use it, but still, like, if this sits out for a couple turns, you can be putting a huge artifact into play just by tapping Jhoira each turn. I think there's also some janky combo potential, especially in Commander, if you can untap this. So if you untap it, you can build up your ingenuity counters really, really quickly. So maybe like Intruder Alarm. Whenever a creature comes into play, all creatures untap or freed from the reel. 1 blue to untap it. You get this going with Jhoira, and all of a sudden you're tapping and untapping and dropping Blightsteals into play in 1 turn cycle or something. I think you can even go infinite with it. Also super janky, but the best combo I found is Ancestral Statue. 4 mana artifact golem creature that when it enters a battlefield, you return a non-land permanent you control to its owner's hand. So what you can do with Ancestral Statue is use it to return itself to your hand. So if you can get Jhoira and something like Intruder Alarm down, get Jhoira up to at least 4 counters, you tap it, put Statue into play, triggers Intruder Alarm to untap your Jhoira, Ancestral Statue bounces itself, do it again, do it again, do it again. If you have something that triggers on creatures entering the battlefield or leaving the battlefield, like Impact Tremors, you're just gonna win the game. You burn the entire table out. So probably not a super competitive thing, but something you could easily slot into a Jhoira Commander deck at a minimum. So I think Jhoira, cool Commander card right now, and maybe something that'll have some standard potential once we get to the Brothers War and then Phyrexia in a couple of months. Next up, we have the return of Squee with Squee Dubious Monarch, and this was a pretty sweet Squee. A 3 mana 2/2 legendary Goblin Noble. It has haste. When it attacks, you make a 1/1 Goblin creature token that's tapped and attacking, and then you can cast Squee from your graveyard by paying 4 and also exiling 4 other cards from your graveyard rather than paying its mana cost. So essentially as escape of 4 mana and 4 cards, not keyworded escape, but still a way to come back from the graveyard. And I think that that makes this a pretty good Squee. If you look at Squee, normally Squee has very little power, but is really good at coming back from the graveyard, coming back from exile. New Squee, the worst Squee at coming back from places, 4 mana and 4 cards, mean you can't just always get it back like you could with the original Squees. The upside is it's a much better creature. I mean, it's a 2/2 for 3 with haste, and it makes a 1/1 that's tapped and attacking whenever it attacks, which kind of makes it like a weird twist on a Goblin Rabblemaster or a Legion Warboss. You give up some power. Part of the upside of like Rabblemaster or Warboss is it makes their tokens really big. Rabblemaster makes itself really big. Squee's not going to do that. It's always a 2/2. It's always making a 1/1. So you give up some explosiveness, but you gain the ability to get it back from the graveyard, which we've seen be very powerful with cards like this. It wasn't that long ago in Standard that Phoenix of Ash was escaping its way to victory. Yeah, Phoenix of Ash does have flying, which is a difference, but I do think that Squee can fill a similar role. So I'm imagining that Squee could develop into some sort of mono red staple. This is the card that lets your mono red aggro deck keep up with control decks. So control will rash your board. Well, you get back Squee, you hit him, you make the token, you start the snowball again, and it's a good enough creature outside those situations that I think that we'll be seeing a decent amount of Squee in red style decks, aggro style decks in Standard. Outside of Standard, probably not going to be good enough if you're competing with actual Goblin Rabblmasters and such, but I don't know, maybe in a Goblin deck or something. It does have the Goblin creature type, which is worth keeping in mind. We also got Braids returning in Braids Arisen Nightmare. And this is one of the cards I've been waiting for the most from the set, because the original Braids, one of my favorite build-arounds in all of Magic, and I was hoping that Wizards wouldn't ruin it and make some super friendly version of Braids, and the new Braids that we did get, it's interesting. 3 mana 3/3 legendary nightmare creature. So at the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice an artifact creature, enchantment, land, or planeswalker. So every permanent type, any permanent right now. I'm not sure why they worded it this way. I guess to leave the door open for a new permanent type in the future. If you do, each opponent may sacrifice a permanent that shares a card type with it. For each opponent who doesn't, that player loses 2 life and you draw a card. It's not as mean as Braids Cabal Minion, that's for sure. The maze in there really changes things. You can sacrifice a land and your opponent gets to choose. Do I want to sacrifice a land or should I just let you draw a card? If it's bad for them, they're just going to let you draw the card because that's probably less bad than losing all their mana. So you're not going to be able to do like what we did a few weeks ago on Mucha Brew and just lock people out of the game with the new Braids. On the other hand, this is still kind of a reasonable card, even in 1v1 formats. It goes up in value even more in Commander, I think, where you sack a land that you don't need. You got 3 opponents. For each one of them that doesn't sack, you're going to get to draw a card. So you could be drawing 3 cards and having 6 life loss if everyone chooses that mode. Worst case, your opponent's losing their land lands, losing their creatures, whatever. In 1v1 formats, I think this is more of a build around. So you're only ever going to draw one card in a 1v1 format. And I think in Standard, maybe the best way to make this work is Blitz creatures. So what Blitz does is it lets you cheat a creature into play, but then you got to sacrifice it on your end step. If you have Braids going though, you can stack your triggers in a way where you sack your Blitz creature to Braids rather than sacrifice it to Blitz. So really easy example, Tenacious Underdog, you Blitz it into play, you smash your opponent for damage, you go to your end step, well, you sack your Tenacious Underdog, your opponent, they either sacrifice a creature, if they don't sack a creature, then you get to draw a card, and you're going to get to draw a card from Blitz anyway, which is pretty strong, and then the next turn you can do that again, and do that again, and do that again, a huge source of card advantage if your opponent doesn't sack, or you're eating away all your opponent's creatures, and this works with any of the Blitz creatures. Could also be good in some sort of like Raven Man, Liliana deck we were talking about before. Like, remember the birds that we were kind of down on with the Raven Man? Well, one way you can take advantage of those is sack them to Braids every turn. You make the birds from your Liliana uptaking, then you sack the birds to Braids. If your opponent sacks a creature, that's fine. You just lost a bird that was kind of useless anyway. If they let you draw a card, that's also fine, because then they're down a card from Liliana, you're going up a card. So I think there's some synergies here. Even if Braids isn't going to lock your opponent out of the game, it is a solid card advantage engine in a sacrifice deck, and it might even have a shot in small numbers in older formats. So we got sack decks in Pioneer and Explorer and Historic with Cauldron Familiars and Mayhem Devils. Since Braids is a legend and also in the same slot as Mayhem Devil, I don't think you're going to play 4 of these, but I can see playing 1 or 2 of them to sack your Cauldron Familiar, to draw some cards and drain your opponent and trigger your Mayhem Devil. And one thing I love about this card is you can sack lands. This is a way to get around flooding out. If you flood out in your aggro deck, you can sack a land. If your opponent goes down a land, well, that's fine. It's probably hurting them more than it's hurting you. If they let you draw a card, that's also fine, because that's a way you can draw out of your mana flood. So I could see this being the top end in like mono black aggro, maybe even back to like Pioneer or something, where you got these mono black aggro decks with a ton of recursive 1-drops that you can sacrifice to Braids, so you can get rid of creatures that way. And then if you need to, when you flood out, you can sacrifice your lands to hopefully find some more action. The other thing that's interesting about Braids is this lets you sack any permanent type that we currently have in Magic. So if you build a commander deck with this, does something that's pretty rare in a mono black deck, which is let you get rid of enchantments with drawbacks. So if you play your Demonic Pact, normally your mono black deck is gonna have a difficult time getting rid of it, because black's just not very good at getting rid of enchantments. But Braids, it can sack your Demonic Pact before it kills you. You can play Necropotence and draw a bunch of cards, and then when you get low on life, you can sacrifice it so you get your draw step back again. You can Treacherous Blessing, Demonic Lure to draw a bunch of cards, but sack it before you take a bunch of damage. So there's certainly some synergies here. So why I was hoping for some sort of super land destruction, prison-y, lock people out of the game Braids, this Braids is still pretty sweet, and I think the new Braids, even if it's not quite as miserable as the old ones, it's still a very powerful card in some sort of sack deck or deck that's built around its abilities. We also got Guardian of New Benalia showing off the new Enlist mechanic, and I gotta say, Guardian of Benalia, the card itself I think is pretty good. 2 mana 2/2. When it enlists a creature, you scry 2, and then you can discard a card to give it indestructible and then to turn and tap it. I think that's relatively powerful. It's a hard to deal with human soldier that's going to be able to stay alive through some removal. On the other end, the enlist mechanic, and maybe I'm missing something, but this mechanic reads to me like it's really bad. Enlist is, as this creature attacks, you may tap a non-attacking creature that you control without summoning sickness. When you do, you add its power to this creature's power until end of turn. So essentially, a Guardian of New Benalia, and you tap your Season Hollowblade, and your Guardian of New Benalia is going to get +3 power until end of turn. And this is a mechanic that could have been interesting, but I think all the restrictions on it kind of kill it, with the biggest one being you can't tap summoning sick creatures. That's, I think, what would make this ability powerful. As it is, think how this is going to play. On turn 2, you play your Guardian of New Benalia. On turn 3, you play your 3-drop. Your 3-drop summoning sick. It doesn't really do anything. You attack with your Guardian of New Benalia. You can't tap your 3-drop because it's summoning sick. And then the next turn, you attack with your Guardian of New Benalia. You can tap your 3-drop if you want to, but why would you want to? You're probably going to be better to just attack with your 3-drop and have 2 creatures attacking, then add your 3-drop's power to Guardian of New Benalia's power. So to me, the way Enlist reads, it doesn't read very powerful for Constructed. I think this is probably a really sweet limited mechanic, where in limited, you're going to end up with these board states where you have some small creatures, your opponent has a bigger blocker, you can't attack with the small creature, so you can just tap it to enlist it, but I don't think that enlist is something you're really going to want to be doing in Constructed. So I think that Guardian of New Benalia, it does have a shot to be a good card, not because of enlist, but because it's a human that can protect itself in the way that Season Hollowblade protects itself by being able to discard a card. Yeah, you gotta tap it, which is a drawback, but we have a lot of human support in Standard. We're losing Luminarch Aspirant, so there's this glaring hole in the human 2-drop slot. So I can imagine some sort of Sigarda, Catilda, human aggro deck wanting to play Guardians of New Benalia just because it's a pretty hard to deal with 2-drop that works with its tribe members. So Enlist, I think that Enlist is the least powerful thing that we've seen from Dominaria. So far this set looks so strong and has so many cool cards. Enlist is the one dud in my opinion, but we'll have to say maybe it'll play a lot better than it looks. And like I said, I think it's going to be a really good limited mechanic. I'm just very skeptical that you're going to want to be enlisting things in 60 card constructed formats, because it's probably better to just actually use your creatures on attacking or on defense a huge percentage of the time. On the other hand, we got a white card that I think might be one of the most powerful cards that we've seen from the set so far. Archangel of Wrath, a 4-mana 3/4 angel with the double kicker thing, where you can kick it for a black and or a red. So you can pay its normal cost plus a black, or its normal cost plus a red, or its normal cost plus a black and a red. And then when it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, it deals 2 damage to any target. And then when it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked twice, it deals 2 damage to any target. So what this is essentially is assuming the colors of mana work, 4-mana 3/4 flying lifelink, that if you pay 5 mana, shocks something when it comes into play. If you pay 6 mana, shocks 2 things when it comes into play. So 4 damage. And remember, because Archangel of Wrath has lifelink, that damage is going to gain you life as well. So if you pay 6 mana for this, it's ETB, 4 damage to something, and you gain 4 life. This is kind of like a Siege Rhino. Yeah, it costs more mana because you got to pay kicker, but this is very, very similar to one of my favorite cards in all of Magic, which is Siege Rhino, except it's a flying version with kicker added on. So I think the Archangel of Wrath, this is just, to me, looks like a constructed stable. You can play it in Angel Tribal. We got some Angel Tribal stuff in Standard. Giada, Inspiring Overseer, Lisa. So you can play Angels if you want to, and that would be fine. But I don't even think you need to do this. I think this is just a legit card that you can play in Mardu midrange. You can play in Black-White midrange. You can play in whatever. Like, if you can double kick this, this is a great card. The only place that it is kind of not great is in older formats. In older formats, I don't think it's going to be that good. Most of the Angel decks there are Collected Company decks. They want to be like white-green. The kicker's kind of in the wrong color, so not super excited about what this is going to do in Modern or anything. But as far as Standard is concerned, to me, if I had to pick one card from the day that I think is just going to be a super staple in Standard, especially out of the rares, discounting the mythics, I think that Archangel Wrath might be the one. This card seems so strong. We also got one more mechanic to look at, shown off on a pretty lackluster card, which is Herd Migration, bringing back the Domain mechanic. So 7 mana sorcery says Domain, create a 3/3 green beast creature token for each basic land type among lands you control, and then you can pay 1 and a green, discard it, search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it in your hand, shuffle, you gain 3 life. So Domain's a sweet mechanic. Domain triggers based on how many basic land types you control. Herd Migration itself, 7 mana is just so much. So I think we'll get some good Domain cards. I don't think Herd Migration, though, is especially great, even with the upside of being able to discard it in the early game to hit a land. I will say, though, one reason to be excited about Domain in current Standard is we got the Triomes, and Domain doesn't care about basic lands. It cares about basic land types. So if you have one of the Streets of New Capenna Triomes, that's going to be 3 basic land types by itself. So if you build around this, it should be very, very easy to have all 5 basic land types on the battlefield. We see Modern decks that get all 5 basic land types with just 2 lands, thanks to Triomes and Shock lands, and we got Triomes in Standard. So even though Herd Migration, I think, is just too much mana to really be a good card in Constructed, I do think that the Domain mechanic has potential to be pretty solid. We also got a pretty interesting Phyrexian Sphinx and Defiler of Dreams. 5 mana, 4/3 flyer. This has an additional cost to cast blue permanent spells. So you may pay 2 life. Those spells cost 1 blue less to cast. If you paid life this way, this effect only reduces the amount of blue mana you pay. And then whenever you cast a blue permanent spell, you draw a card. So Defiler of Dreams, another twist on Phyrexian mana. It essentially gives your blue permanent spells 1 Phyrexian mana. And when I first read this card, I thought it was going to be kind of busted because I thought you could pay blue a bunch of times, but it turns out that's not really what it's saying. So first off, the downside of Defiler of Dreams is it only works with permanents. So this is not reducing the cost on your counter spells, on your Cyclonic Rift, on your dig through time, and that's what many blue decks are built around. You think of blue, you think of control, you think of spells. Defiler of Dreams doesn't really do anything other than be a overcosted 5 mana 4/3 flyer in decks like that. But if you got a lot of permanents, this can be pretty sweet. In standard, we got several blue 1-drops: Lantern Bear, Delver of Secrets, Hypnotic Grifter. You can slam Defiler and then play these cards for 2 life, and then when you play them, you're also going to get to draw a card because they're blue permanent spells. So maybe this could be the top end of some weird blue aggro deck. Could also help ramp you into like Hullbreaker Horror, Jin Gataxias. But remember, you only get to use 1 Phyrexian mana per spell. So your Hullbreaker Horror, you can't pay 4 life and cast it for 5 colorless mana. You can't pay 2 life and cast it for 5 in a blue and cast it for 6 mana. Same with Jin Gataxias. So essentially this is for 2 life, you get a 1 mana discount on your blue permanent spells. When I first read it, I thought it was going to be absurd in Mono Blue Devotion. And now I think it's still really good in Mono Blue Devotion, but not quite as absurd as I thought. Because I was thinking, oh my god, like I can pay 6 life and just pay X for Gadwick. That's going to be absolutely busted. Or cast my Merfolk Tricksters for free by paying 4 life. Doesn't quite work that way, but this is still a great way to flood the board with blue mana symbols, to pump up your Nykthos and cast huge Gadwicks. So interested to try this in Mono Blue Devotion in like Pioneer or Modern. I think it could have a home there as well. Maybe the best home for this though is going to be in Sphinx decks in Commander, especially Unesh decks. Unesh has this ability where your Sphinx costs 2 generic less to cast. Well, Defiler of Dreams, it is a Sphinx, so it's going to be 3 mana with Unesh, and then once you get Defiler of Dreams and Unesh going, you're getting a blue mana discount from Defiler for paying 2 life, and then you're getting 2 mana off your Sphinxes because of Unesh, and then when you have Unesh out, whenever a Sphinx enters the battlefield, you mini Factor Fiction, your top 4 cards, someone puts them into piles, you get to grab one of those piles, so you can just kind of like combo off if you have both of these cards going and cast a ton of Sphinxes, draw a ton of cards, which draws you more Sphinxes, thus you cast more Sphinxes, which draws you more cards, and eventually you just snowball into this massive board of blue flyers and win the game. So I think that's going to be where Defiler of Dreams is at its absolute best. There's also like a super janky combo with Shrieking Drake. Shrieking Drake, 1 mana 1/1 flyer, then when it ETBs, you return a creature to your hand. If you have Defiler of Dreams out, you can Shrieking Drake, bounce itself, you can do it for free by paying 2 life with Defiler of Dreams and draw a card. So it essentially ends up being build your own greed in Mono Blue. So Defiler of Dreams, that's a sweet card. It's interesting to see how Wizards is trying to bring back one of the most broken mechanics in the game's history in Phyrexian mana, but do it in a way that's not broken. And I think so far, Wizards has managed to add Phyrexian mana back into the game in a way that's flavorful and definitely feels Phyrexian, but nothing we've seen so far feels broken or over the top, which is pretty cool. Wrapping things up today with some lower rarity cards and a couple quick notes on non-main set cards. As far as lower rarity cards, there's one of note today, which is Impede Momentum up in the top middle, 1 in a blue sorcery, scry 1, tap target creature and put 3 stun counters on it. And stun counter means if a permanent with a stun counter on it would become untapped, remove one of the stun counters from it instead. So I gotta say, I really love this stun counter thing. One of the most blue feeling ways to remove creatures is to tap them down. That's been how blue deals with things pretty much forever, and it feels very blue. Blue isn't good at killing things, exiling things, but it is good at slowing down things a little bit by keeping them tapped, and we've seen many cards through Magic's history that tap a creature and make it not untapped during its next untap step. Stun is essentially the same thing, but it gives Wizards a little bit more flexibility for powering up this tap down removal because you can put counters on it now. What Impede Momentum really is imagine a Magic card that was the same mana cost, same whatever, but it said tap target creature and it doesn't untap for its next 3 untap steps. That's what Impede Momentum is. The problem with that other wording is it's just really clunky to keep track of. Like, how many untapped steps have we went past? I don't know. Like, who's remembering all this stuff? Impede Momentum, because it uses these stun counters, gives you an easy way to track that, and I love this as a twist on blue removal. Imagine if Wizards wanted to make something that was closer to a hard removal spell. You could put 5 stun counters or something. That's 5 turns of the creature not untapping. That might be the whole game in a lot of formats. So this gives Wizards a way to more flexibly make blue removal that's not just like tap your thing down for now, tap it down for 1 additional turn, but still not giving it hard removal. So I think this is a really, really cunning way to power up blue's removal without breaking the color pie and doing something that blue shouldn't be able to do. Outside of the main set, couple of promos and other things to note. So we got a Dismember Phyrexian Language promo, which is spectacular. That's going to be given away at LGS's. And then we got a tiny bit of information about a new set coming this winter, and that is Dominaria Remastered. So we talked about this on stream the other day, and I was really hoping that Dominaria Remastered would be a mixture of all the sets and cards set on Dominaria, and that is exactly what it's going to be. 27 sets, I think Wizards said, are going to be a part of this Dominaria Remastered set, and the cards so far look really sweet. We see Force of Will coming back, Aboria coming back, so that set should be absolutely insane. I'm super hyped for this set. It's going to be draftable, all that stuff. Time Spiral Remastered was a great set, one of the best sets of its year. So if this is anything like that, it's gonna be one of the best sets of 2023. I'm ridiculously hyped for it. The only thing I'm worried about is Wizards did say it's gonna be a limited print run set, and the one issue that Time Spiral Remastered had was we just ran out of supply. You couldn't get boxes. It became too hard for players to actually play with the cards. So that's the one thing I'm concerned about, is how limited is this supply going to be? Is it going to be possible for players to actually get boxes of Time Spiral Remastered, or are they just going to run out super, super quickly with all these crazy, ridiculous old border Force of Wills and stuff? So we'll have to wait and see, but I'm really hyped for that set. Finally today, we got some Commander stuff. So this is not legal in Standard stuff. The top row, all box toppers, a couple of the bottom row, and then we got the 2 face commanders from the Commander precons of Planeswalkers down at the bottom. And I mostly wanted to show these off just to let you know how Commander spoilers are going to go this time around, which is we're going to be covering them over on the MTGGoldfish Commander YouTube channel. Tomer's going to be doing that. We're going to be focusing on the main set stuff rather than the supplemental products focused on Commander. So some of the cards are pretty neat. Our video is already like an hour long, so we're not going to get into all these, but head over to MTGGoldfish Commander YouTube and check out some of these cards once Tomer gets a video up in the future. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily Dominaria United spoilers for today. So let me know what you think. How insane is this set? This set looks so amazing. Liliana's, so many callbacks, powerful cards, Painlands. This set looks so good, but I want to know what you think. You've heard me rambling on for an hour about these cards. What are you hyped for? What are you thinking? What are you brewing? What are you going to do with these cards? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back tomorrow with more daily Dominaria United spoilers. So until then, have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.